At Kroger, fresh groceries are our thing, so we check your delivery order for freshness at every step from farm to store and pick and pack every veggie in your free pickup order with care, because we treat your food the way we'd want ours to be treated. We're fresh every day, so shop anyway. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Free pickup on orders of $35 or more. Restrictions may apply.
And now you'll find more ways to save on your favorites. When you download digital coupons, you can use up to 5 times in one transaction. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Hi guys, Sam here. On the 1st of April, I'll be raising money for sick, disabled and disadvantaged Aussie kids by taking part in the Variety Spin for Kids Charity Day. Last year, I was able to raise over $500 as part of my team's $2,000 goal, with a number of incredible donations from people around the internet wrestling community. This year, I hope we could do it again. Variety are a great charity that are able to step in when government support doesn't reach people in need, providing things like wheelchairs, communication and hearing aids, medical services, therapy, and more for young kids. If you'd like to get behind Variety and support my ride, there will be a link in the podcast description and also on my Twitter. Thanks in advance, but now let's hit the music and get on with the show. Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the definitive AEW Match Guide, as ranked by over 30 wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on the podcast app of your choice, and make sure you check out all of the other great shows here on the Social Suplex Podcast Network that cover all aspects of the world of pro wrestling. My guest for today is the creator of Styles Make Fights on Pro Wrestling Musings, Sergi, and we are looking at Maki Itoh versus Ryo Mizanami in the first round of the Women's Championship Elimination Tournament. How are you going today, Sergi?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. Before we get started, for those of you who don't know you, can you just tell everyone a little bit more about Styles Make Fights? Because that's one of my favorite little hidden gems in the internet wrestling media landscape.
Well, as soon as AEW came on the scene, I was really interested in the rankings and in how they worked that out in terms of applying kind of a sabermetrics aspect to pro wrestling. I remember I was trying to apply like ELO rankings to it, and then I saw what Craig was doing with gathering stats on all of the types of offense being put out in every single match. And I just thought that was really fascinating. And I wanted to look at, all right, we have this data. How can we put it into context better? What's some things that we can do to get an idea of, well, what does that mean? You know, you look at a raw number of strikes or grapples or whatever. It can be tough to understand what that means in context. And Styles Make Fights is a series of articles and a workbook, a tool using Google Sheets that is intended to take the stats that Pro Wrestling Musings has on all of the offense of AEW competitors and putting into context in different ways and being able to look at, okay, in terms of the general universe of all of the AEW matches so far, 50 strikes or whatever, what is that as a percentile? You know, that kind of thing. And then it also shows them as color-coded bars, graphs, and then shows two competitors side by side, allowing you to do some comparison or different aspects of competitors side by side. So if I want to, I can take a look at one competitor's stats through this time period compared to that time period. So like before they won a belt compared to after they won that belt, and see if it made a change, or a change in character. If they turned heel, did it change how they fought? That kind of thing. And I think that it shows some really, it gives us some really great insights into how it works. People will say that stats don't mean anything because it is not a shoot competition, and I think that's completely false, because if you look at it, you will discover that what they do is by choice, because this is something that they're choosing to do. There's creative decisions that they're making involved in what types of offense they use, and et cetera, et cetera. But they make very careful choices, and it really gives you a great insight into how wrestlers think and how they put together what they do, to look at it this way.
Yeah, certainly agree. Pro Wrestling Musings is a website I've had a little bit to do with. I've done a few little contribution pieces on there. But look, we're all massive nerds here. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're a pretty big wrestling nerd. And this is like really interesting stuff to be able to pull up and dig into and, spend an afternoon having a look at. Or, before a pay-per-view, pulling up the two wrestlers and comparing them. So I definitely suggest if you haven't ever checked out Styles Makes Fights on Pro Wrestling Musings, it's worth digging into. And you've sort of mentioned before that doing this stuff has contributed to how you felt about AEW and has been a part of your AEW journey, so to speak. But by way of introducing, I guess, how you personally got into AEW, when did you first discover it and how did you get into it?
Well, I was aware of AEW and following AEW since before the beginning, the All In, the very first show that isn't actually an AEW show, but is sort of the precursor to AEW.
It's like Show Zero, really the pilot.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not technically AEW. It's technically sort of ROH, but it's very much the testing the waters. I remember the bet. At the time, I was probably still a pretty big fan of NXT, and for a little while, I was a fan of both going into it. But there were just a few things about the way that WWE product was being presented that was just kind of turning me off at that point. I really enjoy it. I think the best way to sum it up would be that within the course of a few weeks, or really within the course of a show, the character of the Fiend went from one of the main reasons for me to continue watching WWE to one of the main reasons why I realized that this show isn't for me anymore. And it's the point at which I realized that they meant for his little world to be a place that someone could actually go. Not a representation of something mental that he's put into a pre-tape that he's put together creatively, and this is presenting something within my mind. But that who's he feuding with? Seth Rollins.
You're talking about when Seth Rollins burnt the thing down, yeah.
Yes, he burned it down. It's just like, well, I suppose that's his catchphrase, but still, yeah. I was just like, no, if that's what you mean by it, that's not. And it's the same thing with Lucha Underground. I really enjoyed their wrestling, but at some point, I think that one of the characters murders one of the other characters, and it's like, oh, this is that kind of show. That's not. Mm-hmm. It just broke my suspension of disbelief in a way that AEW is very careful not to. I think there was one case where Tony Khan said, you know what, you're Matt Hardy, you know your character. I'm going to let you do this, and we'll see how it goes. And they did the teleportation, and it was poorly received. And ever since then, he's been like, this is the level of suspension of disbelief that our fans want, and that we're not going to go beyond it.
I think to be fair to Lucha Underground, they set themselves up to be a more fantastical universe and a bit more of like a sci-fi fantasy world that wasn't grounded in the reality that you and I both live in, whereas AEW grounds itself in that reality, which is why that didn't work. It's why one of the reasons that like the Nightmare Collective didn't work. They were sort of doing something with that where it was like it was all in Brandy's head, but it was also happening on the screen. And you're right. Since those early forays, they've really not done anything like that. They've made sure that everything, even like this Malachi Black stuff, is very much grounded in the universe that you and I live in today. And I guess that stuff happening with the Fiend probably coincided very nicely with when Dynamite was kicking off as well. So,
yeah, exactly. It was just a case of.
And
I have
jump off one ship onto the other.
Exactly. I have a better option than this that caters to what I'm looking for in wrestling. I'm going to go with that. Because even though at that point, of course, Danielson was still there, and one of the main reasons why you'd be like, well, I still want to follow him, but it's that there was a feeling of, as long as he's there, there's this ceiling over what he can accomplish, because he's within that context that kind of constrains him. And I think that's what he said since he's arrived at AEW. It's like, hey, I loved working in WWE. There are many great things about it, but I'm free to really wrestle here.
And I maintain that up until, for myself at least, I was a fan of AEW, same as you, from before it even began. Like, I was a fan of BTE, fan of All In. The people who listen to this podcast are sick of me talking about it, probably. But in terms of WWE, like, I was still following them week to week and very much invested up until WrestleMania that year in 2019. It was only really later in that year when I really was just like, I'm just not going to even bother following this anymore. There was a lot of stuff that happened after that WrestleMania, which was a really good WrestleMania, the best WrestleMania they'd had for a number of years at that point, with things like Kofi Mania, which Brian was involved in. I was heavily invested in the Seth Rollins title feud and the run he'd had with the IC title up until that point. You know, they had a great little program with the Shield leading into it, and then even afterwards a little bit as well. There's a lot of good things going on at the start of 2019, but yeah, man, WWE picked a hell of a time to really go off the rails, sort of over that summer and into, as you said, there was a lot of people who loved The Fiend, but then that Hell in a Cell happened, and that certainly, that a lot of people lost faith at that point. And there's been plenty of people who maintained it afterwards, of course, and Reign was an incredibly popular character, but there was a lot of people who was like, no, the magic's gone, and then it just, got further and further dragged through the mud, as you said, with, things like that happening, where it just breaks what they'd previously set up for him. Anyway, look, this isn't a podcast that is meant to be about ragging on the WWE. I was a massive WWE fan for a long time, so I don't want to bring that too much into it. But
absolutely.
For a lot of people,
you go. Sorry to interrupt. I completely agree. I think a lot of times AEW fandom can really fall into dogpiling, and it's just like, you know what? It's not for me. It's not for you. It's for somebody, and let them enjoy it. That's my attitude. Indeed. There's no reason to. The only reason I brought it up because it is an essential part of the answer to the question. What brought you to AEW? A big part of it was becoming disillusioned with WWE, and that's just my personal taste and blah blah blah. Fine for anybody who still is enjoying it.
And look, I think now is a good time to introduce the match as well, because we're not talking about a match that was universally loved at the time. So of course, as I mentioned previously, we are looking, and if you read the title of the podcast you just pressed play on, we're looking at Maki Itoh versus Ryo Mizanami, the first round of the Women's Championship Eliminator tournament. As we always do here on the AEW Match Guide podcast, we're going to give this match its flowers. Dave Meltzer did not rate it. Cage Match has it in its 6.74, where we did the definitive match guide. It came in 60 seconds. So, Sergi, you actually hold this is the first time we've covered a match on this podcast that didn't make the initial top 50 cutoff for the definitive match guide, when it was voted on by a whole bunch of people across the internet wrestling community from all different websites and stuff. Lots of different opinions there, lots of diversity across it. This one didn't make the cut. It did get a few votes, but it didn't make the cut of that top 50 that we profiled when we published it. And I guess that leads me to ask, why did you want to do this on the podcast?
Well, I definitely have some tastes and preferences that are a little bit out of the norm, and definitely wanted to focus on something like that. First, I wanted to look at is there a women's match that I think I'm really excited about and that about talking about? And is there a match that I know that I like more than most people, so that I'm not stepping on people's toes that want to, like we were talking about, that want to talk about Cody versus Dustin, the really popular matches. And, when we were talking about what are some matches that we could cover, I mentioned a Darby Allin match that I really like. And you're like, yeah, somebody really wanted that one. It's like, okay. And then this match came to mind. It's like, okay, that's a match that's in my top 10 when I put in my ballot, that I know that probably wasn't on hardly anybody else's ballot, much less than their top 10.
And I'm really keen. I didn't vote for this one, but I'm really keen to dig into it because I rewatched it. It was quite enjoyable. And watching wrestling week to week, of course, we have these giant tentpole matches. You mentioned Cody versus Dustin. Everyone wants to do a podcast about the Young Bucks versus Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega. We'll do that one day, of course. But the wrestling week to week is made up of matches that are about 10 to 15 minutes long. And it's about seeing what people can do in that time. And this is a match that I think really maximizes its minutes and does a lot with not much, with two characters that most of the audience probably is very unfamiliar with. So I'm really excited to dig into this match a little bit more.
And that's another reason that I chose it, is that it is a match that does an excellent job of introducing two completely brand new characters.
Exactly.
Two characters that most people had never seen before, or in the case of Ryo Mizanami, had seen just very minimally when she had shown up in AEW before.
Yeah.
But it gets over who they are and why we care in such an amazing way.
Yeah, so the match, of course, was part of the Women's Championship Eliminator tournament, which was put together across January and February of 2020 in the lead up to AEW Revolution 2020. And it was filmed across America in Daly's Place, across Dark and Dynamite, and in Japan, with the Japanese selection airing on YouTube across 2 special episodes where they did the 2 rounds of the tournament to see who would progress from that side of the tournament to face off against the finalists from America. The ultimate prize, of course, for winning the tournament was going to be the opportunity to challenge Hikaru Shida for the AEW Women's title at the pay-per-view Revolution. Just broadly speaking, when this tournament was announced and as it got rolling and the people got introduced, how did you feel about the tournament, Sergi?
Well, the tournament was an amazing thing because one of the biggest knocks on AEW was that the women's division is not booked well enough, is weak, etc. And that's still a knock on the AEW women's division because it's gone up and down a bit. And this is definitely one of the high points where people who had been frustrated with the women's division said, okay, now it seems to be going in a good direction. And they weren't, unfortunately, able to maintain that as much as people might have hoped. But it did a really great job of introducing some new ideas, getting some characters over, and giving the whole division some momentum. Now, on the flip side of that, I know that there are people with equity-minded perspective who looked at the Eliminator tournament and said, well, in a men's Eliminator tournament, we wouldn't have had YouTube specials. All of the matches would have been on Dynamite. And yes and no. I mean, when the men's World Championship Eliminator tournament was running, there was that was the very beginning of the pandemic when there was, they had very little to work with and that they were kind of hurting for content to fill out a Dynamite. When things are a bit more busy, I can see how every tournament match making it onto Dynamite might not have worked out. And I think that the assumption that a YouTube special is inherently a lower thing just because Dark is on YouTube, I think was the wrong perspective. I mean, if we look forward a little bit to when SmackDown and Rampage had their a little collision, they had a YouTube special to buy in, and that was considered very high profile. You had Danielson versus
Minoru Suzuki.
Suzuki.
Like,
and,
literally a match that for that match, like literally the year before, I did a fantasy draft where a bunch of us took wrestlers who'd wrestled over the last decade and we put together our dream rosters. I had Daniel Bryan and Minoru Suzuki in my promotion that I'd selected, and I was thinking about putting them off as a dream match. So I had pretty much booked that match, and then it happens, and it's on YouTube. Yeah, I agree with you. Like, that's a good perspective to take. When I heard about this, I was so excited. Tournaments are always exciting because you get the lineup, and there's just so much storyline possibility. So many different things that could happen. And in this one, you had some people some people you didn't know. And that just allows you the mind to run wild with fantasy. And then as it goes through, it's a fantastic way to, book out some TV because it's written there. They match against each other. They have a match and then someone progresses, someone doesn't progress. And wrestlers can take stories throughout the tournament where, like maybe they get injured in the first round, so they're fighting against that. They've got to fight through that injury as the tournament progresses, or, maybe they have a giant win in the first one, or there's an upset. Tournaments are always fantastic. And this felt like such a shot in the arm for the division. As you said, that division, it was in a really rough place in 2020, particularly. This, of course, happens at the start of 2021. And this was just such a fantastic way to get things off and running in 2021, and felt like a really unique concept as well, having it spanning across America and Japan. Particularly, we'll get into it when we talk about it, but I really like the presentation of the Japanese side of the bracket. It felt different. It felt unique. And to what you were saying, I guess, I do understand the criticism of this wasn't on the main TV show, like the premier TV show. But I feel like they did air a lot of the women's side of the bracket on the TV show, the American side, sorry. Of the bracket on the TV show, but the Japanese one, it's in a different location. It's a very different atmosphere. I don't know how it would have worked if they tried to intersplice it with Dynamite, given that Dynamite is theoretically being done as like a live broadcast. I don't know. I don't think it would have worked at all. And I think it worked well the way that they produced it with 2 episodes. Getting into the actual people in this match, of course, Ryo Mizanami, as you mentioned, she had previously appeared in AEW as part of the Joshi 6-woman tag match at Double or Nothing in 2019. She is, of course, a veteran of the Japanese Indies, has wrestled a veritable who's who of the Japanese Indies. And Maki Itoh on the other side of the ring, originally a Japanese idol who transitioned over into wrestling. Wrestling has been slowly sort of making a name for herself, working her way up in the industry, most prominently in Tokyo Joshi Pro. Sergi, obviously, as you mentioned, we'd seen Ryo Mizanami once before, but were you at all familiar with either of these wrestlers when they were announced?
Ryo Mizanami, of course, I'd seen her at Double or Nothing, but she hadn't made any major impression on me. It's I remember vaguely what she looked like, and that she had sort of a superstar, sunglasses kind of a deal going on. But I couldn't have told you anything much more about her at that moment. Maki Itoh is what I think a lot of people would describe her as a meme wrestler, in the sense that being very online, I was pretty aware of her fandom and of her gimmick, just because, just the whole thing, the calling people simps and swearing a lot, and just her whole deal had sort of become very memeified and aware of on the internet, but I'd never actually seen her. I hadn't gone as far as to let's take a look at this person's wrestling, but I was generally aware of her and curious about her. It's okay, I've heard about this person. Let's see what she's like in a match that they know that this is going to be seen by an audience that hasn't seen them before, so they're going to have that in their mind, and they're going to present themselves here's who I am. And so it's this would be a good match to start with for someone who's curious about this person. Okay. And it turned out to be very much that. It's this is a perfect introduction. It's if you've never seen this person before, you get to see this is what Maki Itoh is about, and this is what Ryo Mizanami is about.
Yeah. Look, I agree. I'm pretty much in the same basket as you when it comes to Ryo Mizanami. I guess from that Joshi 6-woman tag match, that was 6 wrestlers that I'd actually no, minus Aja Kong. Of course, I'd heard of Aja Kong before. But apart from Aja Kong, I hadn't heard of or ever seen any of those wrestlers before, and she wasn't one of the ones that stood out to me in terms of one that made an impression. So when she was announced, I was like, oh, I know that. And then someone mentioned, oh, she was in this thing. Oh, yeah, I remember her. She had the beaver tail or something like that. So, not someone who made a dramatic impact on me. And Maki Itoh, I'd never heard of her before, honestly. But she made an immediate impact on social media when she's announced, I think, started calling people motherfuckers. And, and there was this person who released man, I should have looked this up. But there was a really little YouTube video that introduced her character and her history, as this person who wanted to be loved, wanted to be adored, but wasn't a very good idol. But when she was doing her idol work, sort of transitioned to wrestling in a very organic way, but was not very good at wrestling either, got beaten by a lot of people and constantly getting beaten down, but always, trying and eventually sort of starting to break through by hell or high water and by hook or by crook. And is certainly someone with a very big personality, which we'll get into, of course, as things go.
The description of her story that you're giving is very much, I would say, a simp's point of view of her story, which is to say
that's probably
of like, well, she tries so hard and she's an underdog. It's like she's playing a character. She is kayfabe not good at wrestling. That's her, kind of like the way that QT Marshall.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's like all of her struggles are intended to make her present a certain way that works within the story. And to me, not so much in a struggling underdog kind of way, but in a whiny little sibling kind of way. But that's my impression, and I know that she has fans who feel the exact opposite.
I wouldn't exactly call her like Bret Hart from an in-ring technician standpoint, but I get what you're saying.
Well, yeah, not to say that she's the greatest Joshi, but she is someone who portrays intentionally being kind of hapless. And it works very well in the stories that they tell.
Yeah. The actual match itself, of course, it took place in a little small warehouse with a ring, no crowd, next to no crowd. I think there were a few extras in there, just a ref, a cameraman, and a few other people hanging around. Very bare bones, like Spartan-like setup. What did you think of what they did with this warehouse here? I think it's actually Emi Sakura's school, maybe. What did you think of it?
That's the impression that I got. And like you were saying, and I completely agree, is that it really sort of it was a breath of fresh air is maybe not the right word. Just it was a change of pace, a really interesting change of pace. It's like this is different. This is definitely it is what it is in the sense of. This is a simple taping. We are here to tape something. One of the things that really struck me in it was just the way that everyone had to play to the camera because that's all there is to play to. And when you see something like that, it just emphasizes how much wrestling is about performing for an audience. And it just kind of makes it weird when the audience is just you. The view of the camera, and they're just projecting towards that camera because that's all there is to project to. But I don't think that it hurt in this case. There are definitely, and partly because it was this sort of a sleeper match that we were talking about. Like, this isn't a high-profile match that everybody had been looking forward to. This is a match that might be a favorite of mine in the sense of, one of those, like, I think this is better than people give it credit for, but it's not like a fated confrontation where you would say, oh, gee, if only there had been fans there to add that extra oomph.
Yeah. Yeah, when you saw their side of the bracket, you were looking at, of course, Aja Kong, Emi Sakura, who'd been more high profile, and then Yuka Sakazaki as well. They're the three names that stood out for most AEW fans because they're people that, we'd had a bit more experience with. This was probably like the third or fourth most anticipated match on that show in that first round. So yeah, but you wouldn't have. It was a bare bones setup, but you wouldn't have known it if you just listened to the announcer. He was announcing them like they were walking out to a packed out Tokyo Dome. I love, as I said in the Veniverse Emi Sakura episode I did a couple of weeks ago, I love the performance of this guy, just really giving it all, even just in this little empty warehouse. Maki Itoh first out, mic in hand, singing a song, pulling out some moves that would, draw attention even in the most crowded of dance floors. Sergi, have you ever pulled off moves like Maki Itoh does in this introduction here?
Well, the thing is that she comes across as a very precise and very intentional performer. And I think that's a really big part of her character is that she's a performer. Her ring gear looks like the costume of someone who's a part of a performance, who's going to be on a stage of some kind. which I think contrasts really nicely with Ryo Mizanami. Her whole ring gear gives the impression, tells you a little bit about her character, where she's supposed to be more of a star. Like, I'm a star. In my mind, at least, I'm a huge star, and I act like one. Whereas Maki Itoh is like, I'm a performer. I'm here to convince you to love me, to sort of kind of a desperate performer. Like, I'm just really, I want to make you decide to love me, and she doesn't do it very well, I don't think.
Wrestling,
but some people just do. Some people do.
Yep.
So it's just, but go ahead.
Wrestlers sing their theme song, particularly when they can hold a tune. That's always a good look in my books. Like, it's always interesting. There's probably a cap on it. You're probably not going to have your male world heavyweight champion singing their song to the ring. But then again, like, tell that to Tyson Fury, right? he would probably sing himself to the ring if they'd let him. He certainly sings on the mic after he wins sometimes. So, and that's one of the absolute certified baddest men on the planet. As you said, Ryo Mizanami comes out second. I really like her look, like a really cool robe, cool looking sunnies, short, like punky, spiky blonde hair, and in the colors of the mighty Newcastle Knights, blue and red. That probably means nothing to anyone but me listening. I really like her look, I think, and I like her, as we'll get into. I think she's a very charismatic performer in her own way as well. And as the match starts, Ryo starts out by taunting Maki Itoh even, but does accept a handshake, locks up early. Maki Itoh backs Mizanami up into the ropes, gives her a forearm to the head, and then demands one. And Ryo Mizanami hits her so hard that Maki Itoh starts to cry. We mentioned early, like, this is a match that maximizes its minutes. What a way to introduce these two characters, Sergi.
Yeah, well, I think that it's really interesting the way that, it starts out with the ref trying to get a clean break, and Ito's like, nah, gives her the forearm when she has her in the ropes. But she's like, hey, fair's fair. I want to give you a free shot too. And she gives you can hit me as hard as you can. I can take it. And
she can't take
it. A completely normal spot to see in a wrestling match. Someone like, I could take it, hit me. But when she does, she falls to her knees, and then obviously fake wailing, crying, and then Mizanami looking around like with utter bewilderment. Clearly has not scouted her opponent.
See,
but
she doesn't realize she's actually wrestling an anime character.
Right. But once the fake cry draws her in, she recovers instantly, and then she stomps and grinds her toes. And it's just like, it's hilarious. Like, the immediate,
and pulls a face like she's a 5-year-old.
Yes,
she is. I'm convinced she is an anime character. Like, that is something you would see in an anime. That exact face that she pulls at this point. I think she puts out her tongue and points under her eye.
Points under her eye, yeah. No,
and
absolutely.
Shakes her head.
What comes across to me is the idea of that this is someone who fakes a lot, and that this is what she does, and that you can't take as earnest anything that she's saying or doing, and she makes that really clear, that this is what she does, and that it's very much the sort of thing that, like, if you have seen siblings trying to basically it's like two siblings, and one of them is trying to convince their parent that the other
O'Reilly. When you need auto parts, O'ReillyAuto.com is just a few clicks away. We offer convenient options for you to get your parts quickly. Order online and pick up for free at your local O'Reilly Auto Parts store. We'll even bring it out curbside, or you can have your parts delivered right to your door with free shipping on most orders over $35. Visit O'ReillyAuto.com.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
One is abusing them, but it's completely made up. The parent in this case being the referee, and that's why, to me, the character is something that I think that for most audiences is going to get really under their skin, because most people can relate to that. That they've had a sibling or a cousin or their children squabbling that way, and they're like, oh yeah, that whole, faking being hurt to get attention and to get the other person in trouble. That's it's very relatable in terms of a
done in a very
dislikable attribute,
Yeah.
but done funny, absolutely
done in a very
done in an amusing way.
dramatic, and I think comedic and well done way. But yeah,
very comedic. Yes.
And look, if Maki Itoh if Ryo Mizanami is in fact the older sibling in this case, she's definitely definitely more powerful, definitely stronger, and shows that, in the next few minutes, taking over the match, hitting some shoulder tackles, kicks, chops in the corner. What did you think of Ryo Mizanami's offense, Sergi?
Well, Ryo Mizanami has some really great offense, but I think that in this match, it's more about her character, in the sense that she needs someone, like later in the tournament when she's up against Aja Kong, she needs someone that's established to be tough to really show, how strong her offense is intended to seem. Whereas someone who is the opposite of tough, like Maki Itoh, it's tough to really get a real feel for what her power level is supposed to be established at. But as far as the character side of it, she does it's great for bringing out who she is and her sort of attitude.
I actually disagree with you there. I think they did a really good job of getting her sort of power over. Of course, like, it helps, if you can make Aja Kong sell, of course it's going to make you look tough. But the way she just like cleaves through Maki Itoh and cleans her out in just about every instance when they have a fair exchange, I don't know, for me personally, I felt like it really did a good job establishing her power, her dominance in this match. Even though, of course, as we'll talk about, Maki Itoh does fight her way back into things. But yeah, I think she looked really good in this match, and it was, given where this tournament's heading, I think it was a really great start off for Ryo Mizanami. I also love her, like, she's got a bit of a unique charisma to her as well. I love the little rope spot she does in the middle of the ring, where she sort of like pretends there's a rope and pulls herself along it, and then then goes and hits a giant clothesline in the corner. I think that's a cool spot. As I said, I really, particularly watching this a second time, I was really captured by the way that she interacts with the camera, and I think in front of a really big crowd, if she was to get on the regular, get in front of the AEW crowd now, we'll talk about this more later on, like where you think, I think she'd really connect, because she's very charismatic. Her offense looks crisp, it looks good, and I think she's good at bringing the audience into the match. As we said, Maki Itoh, she fights back but is ultimately outmatched, manages to counter a body slam, attempts a hammerlock DDT and a running bulldog. I think, like, as we've said, like, Maki Itoh is a character that's meant to grind up against you a little bit, but I think there's charm in how she really does go for it when she can, and she really does throw herself into it. There's charm in the way that she lays it in when the time is right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing that Maki Itoh has that I think really works, is very effective for her, is that since she's established as this character who is outmatched and just kind of has to pick her spots, because, she's not going to be able to overpower anybody, and she's not going to be able to out-wrestle anybody, really. She kind of has to pick her spots, but they've sort of established that she has a weapon that she can use that can't be taken away from her, and that's her hard head. And I think that's really interesting, the way that they established that very early on, her famed hard head, and that leads up very nicely to the headbutt spots that are coming up. And I think it's really interesting. After the running bulldog, she doesn't press her advantage, but instead poses and asks who is the cutest in the world. But then she does the mounted corner punches and then lays Mizanami out in the middle of the ring. And then the setup for this move, the Kokeshi Crusher, is a lot like a People's Elbow or a 5-knuckle shuffle setup. You got your supine opponent, and then you go to the ropes and jump and bounce off the ropes and go and then do a falling move. Real similar to a lot of really popular moves like that. Well, popular and sometimes hated, if you see what I mean, that they get a reaction, whether a good or a bad. But in her case, it's this really amazing sort of fall.
Yeah. She's like so
falls.
Straight when she falls.
It's amazing. I mean, it's one of the reasons that she is a meme wrestler is that if you catch the right frame of her falling, it just looks surreal.
Ridiculous.
Exactly. She's ridiculous at that angle and just, yes.
And it seems like that kind of thing. It seems simple because it's like, oh, well, she's just falling and landing with her head. But the way that she keeps her body so rigid, there's been a lot of practice going to that and like thought to get it right and being like, I want to be dead rigid. And you mentioned also before how she's yelling out these things. I said this in the one where where me and Sam Roberts talked about the other first round match that we covered from this tournament. But the commentary performance is a tour de force from Excalibur. The way that he like translates, particularly Maki Itoh's character, introduce and talks about what she's doing, explains what she's saying, and also gets over Ryo Mizanami in such a short amount of time. Absolutely perfect performance from Excalibur there. And that, a one-man booth is never easy, and he just absolutely slays it. But you bang on about Maki Itoh.
I agree though about Excalibur. I think that in the future, Excalibur is going to be looked back on in kind of awe, the way that people do with JR, or the way that certain fans do with
what JR does with Gordon Soley.
Oh, Gordon Soley. I was thinking of ECW's guy.
Joey Styles.
One man with Joey Styles. People are going to look back and like that was a golden age. When he was doing this. Not to say that he's going to stop anytime soon, but I'm just saying it's just he is amazing in that he brings forward everything that a wrestling fan would want in a wrestling announcer, in a play-by-play announcer. He knows everything, and he has enthusiasm and a great voice for it. So it's really, and he does an excellent job in this whole tournament, and especially in this match. I just really enjoy the way that he sets up and lets us into this world that's very opaque. This is people we've never seen before, with slightly different cultural customs, but in other
weird
ways,
setting.
Exactly. But in other ways, wrestling is amazingly universal. There's so much about what they're doing that is immediately recognizable and understandable. So it's really something.
Yeah, moving along with the match itself, after Mizunami kicks out, I think between 1 and 2, after the Kokeshi, Maki Itoh gets Mizunami in a Boston Crab. I love Ryo Mizunami's selling here. And then Ryo gets out of it, hits a really great power slam and leg drop. I love the snap that she gets on her moves and the way that she sells and the way that she, in some ways, like the way that she moves in the ring. I started to like compare her in my mind to Tomohiro Ishii, like not someone who is looking at you'd be like, oh yeah, that's a star wrestler. But once they get going, you're like, wow, this person really knows what they're doing. Particularly like the way she kind of roared out of the Kokeshi at 1 and the way she was selling in the Boston Crab, because that's the underrated thing with Ishii is he no-sells things and is famous for that. But the reason that works so well is because of how well he does sell when he starts to sell. And I got those vibes. And then the snap that was on Mizunami's moves when she hit them. I was really loving Ryo Mizunami throughout this one. And then, of course,
this whole segment is Ryo Mizunami's chance to shine. She's showing what she does. But here's one of the great moments. She goes for a clothesline, and Maki Itoh catches her arm. And then she does a headbutt to her elbow. It's just such a great, you have to have established the weapon in order for that spot to even make sense.
Yeah.
Like, this person has an incredibly hard head. And then she does not knowing that she would get great play-by-play, she does the gesture to help get across. Like, this is what's going on here.
Yeah, hard head, figuratively and physically, Maki Itoh.
Sure.
They had a great strong style exchange, and of course Ryo ends up getting the better, battering down Maki Itoh. And look, that's basically the story of it. Before we get into the final stretch, like the story of this match is pretty simple. that Ryo Mizanami is overwhelmingly more powerful, but Maki Itoh by hook or by crook or by, solid head will fight her way back into it and sort of get the odd counter and get back into the match using that. We had an interesting exchange beforehand, and there was talk online after this match happened about like what the sort of the dynamic was of this match. Just before we get into the final stretch, I wanted to talk about that. I don't like the term shades of grey. That's the way it's most commonly portrayed. I just normally say complex characters, where you've got characters who will act with consistency, and sometimes that will mean they're in the position of what a traditional face would be. Sometimes that will mean they're in the position of what a traditional heel would be. I'd like to get your opinion on this though, because I know you've got you wanted to share your thoughts on it. Like, who do you think fit into that face mold, and who fit into that heel mold in this match?
Well, I agree with you that more importantly, these are consistent characters. These are characters who know who they are regardless of how they're reacted to. Maki Itoh has some aspects where I can understand how some fans respond to her as if she were a babyface, in the sense that she kind of openly asks to be loved. And that gets a response from people. But at the same time, and a part of her character that shows insecurity and kind of an unbelievable sort of insecurity that fits her character and her story, but also is really good at deflecting or should do a good job of deflecting any accidental turning of her from the heel side. She then has contempt for people who do give her love. That the whole thing of calling her fans simps, that's like, you are an idiot for liking me is kind of a whole deal. And I think that's it's really an excellent way to give people a character who seems desperate to be loved, but also has a way to deflect sympathy and become less sympathetic. Also has a very strong social media game, which will help ingratiate you to certain fans, regardless of what you do online. As MJF found out at Full Gear, where people cheered MJF. Who cheers MJF? I don't want to see MJF. People were saying, well, he got cheered. He got a few chants.
Any chant is too many when it comes to that.
I agree. And I feel the same way about Britt Baker. It's like, I don't understand why people are cheering her. It's like, she's great, but she's a great bad guy. Can we boo, please? Whatever. You can't control fans. But I do think that she is a great heel and that's her natural role. But she is also very much a complete character, and a situation could arise where it makes sense that people would forgive her faults and see her more likable side. Which is what you were saying, the fact that she always tries and always struggles, and she is kind of a what's the word I'm looking for, an underdog, but no more so than who's the guy in what am I thinking of, the Wingmen, the one who claims to be pretty but really is not.
Peter Avalon.
Yep. He's someone who's always an underdog in every match, but that doesn't mean that you cheer him. There's the sort of schmuck character that I think that people don't realize. It's like there's a character, room for a character who is really overmatched, but is still booable.
Yeah, it's the kind of character where, if you turn the dial one way a little bit on some aspects and the other way on other aspects, it can really fit either side. Kind of like the John Moxley character in the lead up to Full Gear before, unfortunately, he had to go into rehab. Previously he'd been very much like, this is the hero of the company. Like, this man is the man of the company. But then they're slowly like turning the dial different ways on him, where that same character, he's not changing character or anything like that, but just different aspects of his life are coming to be. So different sides of that personality is showing on TV, and all of a sudden he's maybe a little bit more furious, a little bit more pissed off, and then one thing leads to another, and you know, I think personally at that point they were aiming to put him into more of a heel position, but you know, it's still a consistent character, and I'm a big fan when they do that, and Maki Itoh definitely fits that. But I think it's fair to say, like, you know, she played possum early on, and then when Ryo Mizanami was distracted by that, she used the chance to get a cheap shot in. Like, that's not something that the hero of your piece is going to be doing. And from Ryo Mizanami's, you know, just the way that she's, you know, fighting through, and the way that she's kind of trying to bring people in through the camera, I think she's definitely like in the face role for this match personally. Of course, let's get into the final stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Maki Itoh wins that headbutt exchange you mentioned before, gets a big swinging DDT, goes for the diving Kakeshi, but unfortunately misses. Ryo Mizanami hits her with a huge spear, really big spear, and gets a close 2 count, then immediately locks in a head and arm triangle choke and just ragdolls Maki Itoh around until she gets a submission. I really liked how she just sort of ragdolled her around at the end. That looked really cool. What did you think of the final stretch there?
Oh, it was really great. I think that one of the things that I really like about it is I was watching this and taking notes and going through it one more time and was like, all right, now how does Maki Itoh get out of – oh, she doesn't. It completely snuck up on me, and I think that's great. That sometimes a finish is like, well, this has to be the end. You know, we've all seen dramatic matches like that where it's like you say, oh, well, this is it. And sometimes you say this is it and you're wrong. You know, that can also be fun. But this was, I think, really snuck up on me. It's like in the sense of it wasn't that it wasn't a credible end, but I wouldn't have been surprised either if Itoh had found a way out of that head and arm triangle. I don't want to – I love Excalibur. He does a great job in this match, but I think he does give a bit of a bad call. I was watching it like a third time, that last bit, and I was like, wait. He calls it as if Itoh is rolling them around to try to get to a rope or try to get free. That's not. Mizanami is rolling them around to ragdoll her and take her out of her game and beat her up a bit. I think that he kind of miscalled that. Calls that last
like a crocodile doing a death roll.
Exactly.
As we said at the start, this match isn't like the greatest match that's ever happened in AEW, but it comes in at 10 minutes, 45 seconds. It is super digestible and really enjoyable. There's art to having a short match where you make the most of those minutes, you tell a story, you introduce characters, and this match like really nails it. I was going back, I hadn't watched this since the first time I watched it, and I only watched it once at that point. I had a great time watching this match. Like, if I've got 10 minutes, I might go back and check out some of the other matches in this tournament because, you know, like I haven't really watched a whole lot of them except for the Venny and Emi Sakura one again because we did it for this podcast. Like, this is a really fun match to get into and to watch.
Well, yeah, and Ryo Mizanami's other matches in this series and Yuka Sakazaki's other matches in this series are all really good. I like this one especially because I think it does a great job at everything you're saying, but especially it does a fantastic job of just introducing brand new characters to a brand new audience in a way that a person could get completely invested in them. Like these are two of my new favorite characters. I would love to see them back. We got a little bit of a run of Ryo Mizanami, and actually she was back on Dark briefly.
Yeah.
But Maki Itoh has not been back in America. I can't wait till she is. I think she is one of the greatest in that role of sort of a pesky antagonist. You know, she's never going to be the dominant killer antagonist, the Britt Baker kind of role, but as the pest buzzing around the heroes that they can't quite swat, just fantastic in that role, and she's just so much fun to watch. And like you said, it's and also I believe that's what I put in my comments in the when I submitted my ballot, a compulsively rewatchable short match, and that's what I enjoy about it.
Yeah, I also watched this very differently, knowing that Ryo Mizanami won the tournament. And this match, as we said, like her next match is against Aja Kong. That's a very different matchup to Maki Itoh. But both of them combine to really put Ryo Mizanami over in a big way before she gets on the plane and goes into the final of this tournament and then goes up against Hikaru Shida. Like, she plows through Maki Itoh here, really. She doesn't really break a sweat in doing it. Even though, like, as we said, Maki Itoh gets her bits in and really makes a strong impression. Like, it wasn't because she was troubling Ryo Mizanami in a big way. And this was a really great way for them to put Ryo Mizanami over in the first round of this tournament. As we said, like, that was going to be my next question. Now we've sort of gone through the match. Like, would you like to see both of these guys back? I agree. I think particularly Maki Itoh has a character that I think would translate onto TV really well. And she has a very likable persona. She's very, like, she stands out in terms of her look. And when she was in that one match, she made a big impression just with the one match that she did. I think if they're looking at people that they can bring over regularly now that restrictions are easing, I think she should be the top of the list if they can make it. Well, not top of the list. I think there's others that I would put there, like particularly Yuka Sakazaki. She's like she's top of the division sort of potential. But as you said, like, Maki Itoh is someone who they should be looking into and sort of working out, you know, can we make the visas work? Can we make the dates work? And have her as someone who's floating around, going into a program with Hikaru Shida when, you know, she's not in the championship, going into a program with Tay Conti when she's not in the championship. She's someone that could definitely put in there. And same with Ryo Mizanami. Like, as I said, I really liked her. Snappy offense, really good selling. And I think she did avail herself well when she was given that bigger platform at Revolution as well.
Well, I want to address those two things. First, you were saying about how well this and the rest of the tournament put over Ryo Mizanami as a credible challenger for the world title, and I agree completely.
Even though she wasn't someone that anyone picked to win it from the get-go.
Exactly. Yeah, she was not anybody's first pick. But I think that it really put her over that she was able to get all of these really kind of surprising and unlikely victories. I mean, in the first round, she goes over this person who has, it certainly isn't someone who is a big physical challenge, but is someone who, had a lot of internet fame and a lot of a lot of people thinking like, oh,
from the meta perspective, it looked like, oh, this is someone they're going to get behind because people like her.
Exactly. And kicking her out in just the very first round, it's like, wow. And then she has to overcome this legend who, doesn't lose very much. Besides being an incredible physical challenge, just like Aja Kong. Of course, Aja Kong's not going to lose. Not this early.
Not in the semifinal.
Like that she does exactly. And then, at that, once you're that late in the tournament, you're up against someone who's already won twice in the person of the Native Beast, Nyla Rose. And she overcomes Nyla Rose once she gets to America. Is that the finals, I guess? Yes. The finals of the tournament, and then she, of course, has to face the actual champion.
Yep.
And, at that point, after two rounds in a row, both of them are built up to the point that either of them beating the other would be a huge boost, and they chose Ryo Mizanami, and it was a huge boost. And at that point, it was just like there was no reason to think that they're going to change the world title to someone that they're just reintroducing. But at the same time, they built her up so much that you could buy it. Like, maybe this is a big build to a new champion.
Yeah. That was probably the only drawback of the tournament, was that the winner she was a credible challenger from a kayfabe perspective, but when, like, we all have the knowledge that this is like that there's certain things that happen backstage that and that have to be factored in when we're looking at who's going to win when when a big championship match happens. And I don't think many people thought Mizanami would be the winner, and that's just it is what it is. But I think a lot of us I thought it was going to be Yuka Sakazaki. And that she would actually potentially win it because her and Britt have they've got old country beef like that hasn't been resolved to this day, and she's a very
That's true.
captivating challenger who could have made a really interesting challenger for Britt, because Britt Baker was obviously at that point at some point going to challenge. It was just a matter of when. She was just a superstar in waiting. So, yeah, that was probably the only drawback in terms of the legacy of this tournament. But overall, I thought this was a really fantastic initiative, this tournament in general, and something that I'd love to see them do again. I don't know if they'll do it this year, but it could just be something that they pull out, in 2 years' time. Say, like, something's happened and we need to, particularly because they've already done a TBS tournament recently. So it's, you can do too many tournaments, as New Japan found out in 2020.
They've got the Owen coming too.
Yeah,
they've got lots of tournaments. They're in.
But like down the line,
mind.
maybe something happens and the championship is vacated at some point. Like throw together like brackets from across internationally. Maybe like do something in England as well, or I'll book out the local scout hall here in Newcastle and they can do something here.
You make a really good point that the whole concept of brackets being nationalized, so that like you said,
gives it a grand feeling.
It does, and it wouldn't have to be 2 brackets; it could be 4. And it's at the semifinals that everybody has to fly somewhere and meet someone from the other one of the other locations. That would be really interesting.
Or what if, like, here's an idea that I've just thought of. What if, like, there's an FA Cup of wrestling, but for AEW? Like, you've got the 2 local indie blokes are fighting in this, like, 2, but theoretically, like, one of them could end up on Dynamite or on an AEW pay-per-view fighting for the title because they've somehow managed to get through like umpteen number of brackets. But what a cool like idea that could be if somehow you're able to implement it.
Yeah, it would be a great way to boost local or indie wrestling around the world. It's like, hey, we're doing this tournament, and pick your best guy and your second best guy to be the guy to lose to him, and send him to us, and we're going to put him into this tournament, and then we'll send him back because he's not going to actually be the champion, but he'll get some exposure. And it'll give a lot of extra meaning to that match that determines which of them goes to the tournament. The qualifier match. Absolutely. Well, the other thing that you said that I wanted to address was, how much Maki Itoh would be a great character in AEW today if they were able to bring her back. And I think that one of the things about that is that when they had that big trios match with Maki Itoh teamed up with Nyla Rose and I believe Britt Baker,
that
at that point, I don't think anybody knew for sure how long she was planning to stay. There was definitely, for me at least, there was a feeling of anticipation that this is going to be a fantastic run if she's staying for a while. And they set up some things that I think immediately made me say this is going to be a great story. This is going to be really entertaining, and I'd love for them to get back to it. I'm speaking specifically of, her whole character revolves around this idea of, she's very overmatched by the other wrestlers. And she was giving Nyla Rose these amazing looks of, here, she could protect me. And it was just amazing. It was so cool. Like, that would be a great relationship of just, the bodyguard and the
another fantastic Twitter follow as well.
That's a very good point. They both have a fantastic Twitter game, so that would make another reason to put them together for sure.
Hey, look, AEW, these are free ideas. Just take them.
Right? No, but although I think that they had the idea of putting those two together, I feel like they hinted at it. It's just that Itoh, as it turns out, was not staying in America that long.
It could be I'm not a giant fan of Vicky Guerrero being in AEW, but having her do the excuse me to interrupt Ryo Mizanami, Maki Itoh's introduction could be fantastic comedy fodder. So, look, I don't have a whole lot more to say about this match. We've sort of covered it all. As I said, fantastically digestible. Really glad we got to cover it on the podcast today. Did you have anything else you'd like to add on there at the end?
Let me think. No, I think we covered everything that I wanted to. I really enjoyed this match. I enjoy these characters. I'm really looking forward to them coming back to America. And they definitely are examples of people that make me want to take the time and try to bridge the cultural gap and watch some more Joshi wrestling than I have. But yeah, just great characters, a great match, introducing great new characters to a new audience. And if you haven't watched this match, or if you haven't rewatched this match, if it didn't make the big impression on you originally, watch it and let me know what you think as far as the controversial thing of, like, is Maki Itoh really the villain here? Or villain's maybe not the word. Is she the antagonist here? Or do her simps have it right, and we should all be rooting for her to, overcome those obstacles.
Yep. Indeed. Well, look, tell the good people if they want to get into that dialogue with you, Sergi, where can they find you?
The best place to talk to me is on Twitter. I'm always following Twitter. It's where all of the Pro Wrestling Musings people are and communicate with each other. And that's Sergi Alderman. Is my name, my very unique name, and therefore my handle. And I'm sure that there's going to be a link in it in this video as well.
Yeah, in the description on the podcast, you'll find a link to Sergi, to all the things he does. Thank you very much for being a part of this today, Sergi, and for bringing in a match that I did not expect to be covering when I theorized about having this podcast, but I'm very glad we did. And thank you to everyone out there who's listened to this podcast today. I've been blown away by the support that this podcast has been getting over the past however long we've been doing this now. And I really appreciate all of the messages of support. As I said at the start, if you want, you can rate this on the podcast app that you are using, and that would be a big help. And, if you have enjoyed it, why not tell a friend? Share it on social media, or tell a friend who loves wrestling to come and listen to the AEW Match Guide podcast. And, of course, if you want to chat to me and you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Twitter, Sir_Samuel. Once again, thank you very much for being with me today, Sergi, and thank you for listening. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.
Moms, at Vanguard, you're more than just a parent. You're the heart of the family. You're the first responder to any need. You can be the hero and the villain, sometimes on the same day, because you know that in the end, your legacy is the values you instill in them. At Vanguard, you're more than just an investor. You're an owner, because the future you're building is bigger than yourself. Discover the value of ownership at Vanguard.com. Fund shareholders own the funds that own Vanguard. Vanguard Marketing Corporation Distributor.
This ad is almost 3 million gallons long, because it's exactly the same amount of time it takes for that much water to flow over the deck at Niagara Falls. So, how does the deck stand up to all that water? Thompson's Water Seal. Just another reason they call us America's recognized brand in water protection. Weather protected, water sealed. Thompson's Water Seal. Trust the seal. Available at a retailer near you.